So why is it called the 8-minute rule and what does it mean? So basically what this means is that in order to build 1 unit of therapy, you have to provide a minimum of 8 minutes of one-on-one therapy underneath that code in order to bill 1 unit. So like you can't provide 4 minutes under a self-care code and 4 minutes under a Therex code. At that point, you just wouldn't be paid at all for your time. You need to bill a minimum of 8 minutes under that code in order to bill that unit of therapy.
Hi, I'm Clarice Grody, and welcome to the Amplify OT Podcast. I'm an occupational therapist by trade and a policy wonk by choice. This podcast is here to help you survive and thrive in the U.S. healthcare system through a better understanding of policy, advocacy, and value-based care. So, let's dive in.
Hey everyone, it's Clarice Grody, the founder of Amplify OT, and before we get started with today's episode, I want to tell you all about mastering OT policy and Medicare. This is a self-paced online course focused on demystifying policy and reimbursement for occupational therapy practitioners that are working in adult rehab. So if that sounds like you, pay attention. This course basically takes everything that I've learned in the last 4.5 years, plus additional information, and I put them all into simple, easy to understand videos that you can watch on your lunch break while you're brushing your teeth, maybe while you're finishing up documentation at the end of the day. But it takes all this information that you need to know and puts them into easy to understand videos that are no more than like 10 to 15 minutes long. But there's about 5.5 hours of total content. There is the opportunity to earn 5.5 hours of CEU content. We have handouts, infographics. The online modules are super easy, so you can access them on your phone, on your computer. Plus, we also have the online community where you can leave comments. So basically, in a few short modules, you'll trade questions and that inaccurate information for a solid and ethical foundation on healthcare policy. So it covers everything from health insurance 101, reimbursement in adult rehab settings, as well as advocacy and where to find information. But if you don't believe me, listen to the people who I've talked to who have been taking the course or interested. Take this from Brittany, who said that she frequently finds that many people have conflicting or inaccurate information regarding Medicare rules. Finding specifics is often difficult and unfortunately often causes us as practitioners to rely on what management has to say. And oftentimes we don't feel like we're able to advocate for ourselves. Or from Tiffany, she says she wants to take Mastering OT Policy in Medicare because that way she can provide a patient with correct information about their insurance and how it affects their services instead of always feeling like they have to go to social work or case management. She also wants to gain overall confidence as a practitioner. I am so proud of this course and everything that's in it. I love the feedback that people are sending me. I have a director of rehab, Lauren, who said she's only watched 2 videos and already feels smarter. So it really does take that information that's complex and that feeling that you're alone in figuring it out and putting it together in a community in a way that's easy to understand. Plus, there is the opportunity to sign up for VIP access, which means for 6 months, you get access to me through Voxer, a voice messaging app to ask me questions and go through real life scenarios that you're facing as you face them in the clinic. So it's a really great service, but there are only a few spots. So sign up today for Mastering OT Policy and Medicare and make sure you sign up before October 14th when the cart closes. Go to amplifyot.com/Medicare to sign up. Again, that's amplifyot.com/Medicare. I also have it linked in the show notes. So don't forget, sign up for Mastering OT Policy and Medicare before October 14th if you're ready to trade that feeling of not knowing for being an informed and empowered occupational therapy practitioner. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today's going to be pretty short and simple. As part of my Q&A series, I'm going to be answering questions that I see on social media. And today's is about billing and primarily the 8-minute rule. And the question reads, "Hey guys, new grad here. No in-depth code discussion before. Can you please enlighten me how to bill timed treatment? What I'm doing now, for instance, is 30 minutes of treatment, billing 20 minutes gate and 10 minutes Therac, or 25 minutes, 15-minute gate and 10-minute Therex. Am I doing it correctly? How do I apply the 8-minute rule? Thank you in advance." I've seen a version of this question a number of times, and I think part of it is because the 8-minute rule, it's kind of confusing in the name. I've seen it called both the 8-minute rule as well as the 15-minute rule, and so let's kind of discuss what exactly the 8-minute rule is. So the 8-minute rule is used in regards to timed codes by Medicare. And basically you use the 8-minute rule to determine how many units of therapy you can bill underneath a timed code based on the amount of treatment time provided. Now there are a couple different ways that this is calculated, but we're going to be talking primarily about the one that Medicare uses, which is the 8-minute rule. It's also worth noting that the 8-minute rule is really primarily used in outpatient or anywhere you're billing Medicare Part B. Under Medicare Part A, oftentimes you aren't technically billing in units because it's kind of more of a case mix payment, so they're not reimbursing based on the amount of therapy you provided like they are in Part B. But oftentimes facilities, even if you're billing Part A, will still have you use CPT codes and still have you report minutes under the 8-minute rule because it's easier to keep a standard billing system or a standard way that you're documenting minutes across all payers versus having different ones based on different payers. Because even in those Part A settings, like maybe SNF or home health, there are going to be some insurers that still require you to bill in units like Medicare does. So that's why you often will still be billing units, even though it may not necessarily be reimbursed in the same way that it is under Part B. So why is it called the 8-minute rule and what does it mean? So basically what this means is that in order to build 1 unit of therapy, you have to provide a minimum of 8 minutes of one-on-one therapy underneath that code in order to bill 1 unit. So like you can't provide 4 minutes under a self-care code and 4 minutes under a Therex code. At that point, you just wouldn't be paid at all for your time. You need to bill a minimum of 8 minutes under that code in order to bill that unit of therapy. And it's important to note here that this applies to timed codes. So those are codes where you can bill multiple units versus untimed codes where you only bill 1 unit regardless of the amount of time provided under that service. So examples of untimed codes include like your evaluation codes or reevaluation codes where even if you spent 30 minutes or an hour with that patient under the eval code, you're only billing that 1 unit. Versus timed codes, the number of units you can bill depends on the amount of time you spent providing a service that falls underneath that code. When I'm talking codes, I'm usually referring generally to CPT codes, which are owned and copyrighted by the American Medical Association. So you're most likely familiar with self-care, Therac, Therex, cognition, those sorts of codes. Now here's where things get confusing because you would think if something's called the 8-minute rule, it would mean that for 8 minutes of treatment, you could bill 1 unit, and then at 16 minutes of treatment, you can bill 2, but that's not quite how it works. So this is where the rule sometimes gets starting to be called the 15-minute rule, because there is a 15-minute gap between when you can bill 1 unit and when you can bill 2. Now, most likely, you have a chart telling you how many units you can bill built into your medical record. I also have this chart in my OT billing guide, and I go over the 8-minute rule in much more detail in the Mastering OT Policy and Medicare course. But when we're talking about that 15-minute time, if you do the math, you have to meet a minimum of 8 minutes, right, to bill 1 unit. You can't build 2 units until you reach 23, and you can build 3 units once you reach 38 minutes, and 4 units once you meet 53, so on and so forth. Technically, under Medicare, there's no limit in the number of units you can bill as long as you provided that treatment. But obviously, it's not very common that your treatment times are going to go over like 83 minutes, which would be 6 units. Now, personally, I have found it easier just to memorize the chart, but the way that Medicare describes it is that you basically would take your total treatment time and divide it by 15. So, for example, if you provided 30 minutes of treatment time and divided it by 15, that leaves you as round 2, and therefore you can bill 2 units because it falls between the threshold of 23 to 37 minutes of total treatment time, which is 2 units of therapy. After this quick break, I'll talk about how Medicare says to calculate the 8-minute rule and answer this person's question. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, then there's nothing I can recommend more than Anchor by Spotify. It's what I use to run the Amplify OT podcast, and if there's anything that I love more about it, it's that it's completely free. And as a small business owner, I am all about free resources. Anchor makes it super easy to have a podcast by having everything in one place. That means recording, that means sharing it on other podcast apps, and that also means ads and subscription services. So if you're ready to get your message out there, then head right now to download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. But what if we have 40 minutes of treatment time, right? The math's not as easy. So you divide 40 by 15, you're still going to get 2, but there's going to be a remainder. Now, if that remainder of minutes is more than 7 minutes, you get to bill another code, which is how we get to the threshold of 38 to 52 minutes for 3 units. So even though there's like a range of minutes that you can provide underneath those units, technically speaking, if you have 7 minutes or fewer left over, you're just not being reimbursed for those minutes. So that's why you may have your employers really emphasizing the importance of watching your time, because let's say, you stopped a treatment at 20 minutes. Well, if you had gone to 23, you would have gotten 2 units of therapy. So basically, that time difference between the 8 minutes and the 23 minutes, you just didn't get paid for. And if you do that multiple times throughout the day where you're not quite getting over that threshold to bill another unit, then obviously you are essentially not being reimbursed for a large portion of the care that you provided that day. You definitely shouldn't round up your minutes, that's illegal. But you also, shouldn't be providing care that's not necessary. But we also have to keep in mind, there's lots of things that we can do in just 3 or 4 minutes, whether it's providing additional education or reviewing a home exercise program one more time, reviewing the goals. There are ways where you can both be time smart, financially smart, as well as providing a high quality care of service to that patient. Now, there are some insurers that use something called substantial portion methodology, but that is a different lesson for a different day. Basically, it doesn't follow this 8-minute rule. It's where you can bill multiple codes, even if you don't reach those 15-minute thresholds. But again, that is a different topic, but it is covered in my course. So if you're interested in learning more about that, then definitely recommend signing up for Mastering OT Policy and Medicare. So to answer this person's question about how to bill, when they are looking at the example of 25 versus 30 minutes, those both will fall within that range of being between 23 minutes and 37 minutes, meaning no matter what, they can only bill 2 units of therapy. Now, they could absolutely bill it into 2 different codes, so they could definitely do 20 minutes of gait training. This is a PTA, for example, and 10 minutes of Therax, or they could do, for the 25-minute example, 15 minutes of gait and 10 minutes of Therax. What you definitely can't do is, let's say, for example, you had 31 minutes of treatment time. You can't look and say, oh, I have 23 minutes under self-care and 8 minutes under Therax, therefore I can bill a total of 3 units, because technically that's not following Medicare guidelines, so you can still only bill 2 units, even if you provided 23 minutes of self-care and 8 minutes of Therax, because you're still not reaching that 38-minute threshold. Now, in this person's example, they used round numbers, but what is best practice and we encourage individuals to do is be as accurate as possible. Now, I will even admit in my own documentation, I did not keep a stopwatch to keep track of exactly how much time I spent on self-care versus exactly how much time I could bill under Therac, but I had a pretty decent idea and I tried to make a good estimate. So you don't want to always be rounding your numbers, but that being said too, don't work too hard in trying to keep an exact stopwatch kind of time as to exactly when you change under different codes. Billing's obviously a fairly complex situation, so definitely make sure you're always going to the source and seeking out accurate information, because billing is a legal document, so you don't want to be rounding up, rounding down, doing anything like that, because by messing with your billing or not doing correctly, you could be in huge trouble either with false claims or just violating the law and falsely representing what kind of services you provided. If you have any questions like this one, feel free to send them my way, and I might just answer it in my next podcast. See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Amplify OT podcast. Hey, did you know that I have a free newsletter? Yes, that is correct. In addition to the free podcast, the free articles, I also have a free newsletter, and you can subscribe using the link in the show notes. This way, you will never miss an update. If you love this podcast, I have 2 requests. First, please consider leaving us a 5-star review, and second, consider leaving a gift using the link in the show notes, so that I can continue to support this podcast and provide this resource for free. Consider it a gift to your future self. And if you don't love the podcast, well, I hope you just have a fantastic day and forget I said anything about that review. Okay, folks, keep speaking out and speaking often, and I'll catch you next time.